Good.
All right. Everybody, I'm going to call this caucus meeting of the Virtual Borough Council to order. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just join me moment of silence for reasons this evening. First, pray for peace in Ukraine. Also, Camden County lost one of its long-serving mayors tragically last night after a brief battle with ALS. Winslow Mayor Barry Wright is a friend of mine, somebody I've known for a long time. Great public servant. Would always say he's never had a bad day in his life when you ask him how his day's going or how he was. So please join me in a moment of silence for him, his memory, his family, for peace. Thank you. This meeting is being held in compliance with the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act and advertised in retrospect on the bulletin board downstairs and all official borough social media channels. I ask for those who are here that if you have a cell phone, please put it on silent. If you need to speak with anybody while we're conducting business, please do so outside the council chambers. Roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
Present.
Mr. McLoone.
Here.
Ms. Morales. Present. Mr. Turner.
Present.
Mr. Sparrazza. Mr. Woods.
Here. Okay, thank you. First on the agenda this evening is the public portion of the meeting. Anybody from the public who wishes to come speak on any topic, please come forward. State your name and address for the record.
Good evening, my name is Jen Opposed.
One up, if you would, please.
Is this optional or?
It is optional.
Deal with it all day long. Thank you. My name is Jen Opposed. I live at 48 West Cedar Ave, Merchantville. Come to you tonight to introduce myself as the new president of Merchantville Consulting. I wanted to talk to you about our use of Borough Field this year. Hopefully we still have that usage. And we'd like to just talk about a couple issues regarding that field. One is the mowing of the field, two is bathrooms, and the third, I'm gonna hold off for a minute. The mowing of the field, we have always typically mowed the inside of the fence, for those of you that are not aware. And we maintain the dirt, the baselines, all of that as well. Last summer, we ran into a little bit of a problem. Our volunteer who mowed that field had some health issues, was very private about it, and sort of dropped the ball in letting us know. So we had a little issue with the field. Public Works thankfully stepped in, took care of the field. We did mow it a couple of times. They told us they were going to mow it, so we stopped mowing it towards the end of the season and into the fall. Just kind of want to get a sense from council. What do I do going forward for the league? Are we still going to mow this? Is this something that Public Works can mow for us? Not really sure at this point. Yeah, I'm the newbie coming in, so I'm coming to you all to get some guidance and some direction.
I would want to meet with our Public Works director and
Okay.
ask you on that
Okay.
and find out like where they're at on the, like, you know.
Yeah, their time frame schedule.
I know when I talked to them in the fall, it wasn't a problem for them to mow. They're already there mowing the other
rest of it,
parts of the community center.
I think the only difference was that it was that the Little League field this time was very particular about how it was mowed. They were very, and so that's the only reason, so they wanted to mow it themselves at the time. But I'll talk to, but just understand that there are times when Public Works might get backed up on something and they won't get around to the point where you would, I think the Little League was mowing it right before the games, like on specific times schedule. Public Works might not be able to meet that particular schedule, so it will be my only concern. I just don't want to have that like jump back and be like, oh, you guys didn't mow the field or something. But I'll talk.
Yeah, if you can just reach out to me and let me know, I'd appreciate it. Because that way, if they have a set schedule that they're doing it. And again, if it's not as frequent as what we need, then.
Yeah, I know they do the set schedule, but the problem is like if it rains.
Right.
Or like the trash collection gets messed up, or there's an event happening in town that weekend, they have to like go to pick up someplace else, so.
Or storm comes through and they're backed up, and
Right.
they with the Wednesday, pick up, but still. some-
Again, then if
Yeah.
it's just, if that be the case, if someone could just reach out to us and I'm sure we can figure out a way
Yeah.
to get it done. That would be really great. The other issue is the bathrooms, is being able to utilize the bathrooms. Last year, we had a system in place to utilize the bathroom in the community center. The key was under lock, in a lockbox at all times, was unlocked at the beginning of the practice or a game, locked, checked and locked at the end. And then in the fall, the lock on the bathroom got changed, and we were not aware. We had no way for our visitors, as well as our parents and children to use a restroom facility. So we just kind of need to know going forward, like what's going to happen, what's going to be the process with that. I probably can speak while I was here, we hate to see a porta potty out there. So I hate for that to have to happen.
Yeah, there won't be a protocol.
Yeah, one for us.
Traditionally, we have a discussion, a use of facilities forum is put together. I've lobbied for years that there's an actual agreement put in place between the parties that outlines everything, including maintenance and use of the bathroom facilities and any costs associated, and how we're gonna handle all of that. We haven't been able to get to an agreement in place, although we've tried. I think that that's probably, and look, I'm a lawyer, so I always want something to be very clear. But I think it's easiest if we put an agreement that says, hey, Public Works agrees to maintain and will maintain this facility, agrees to cut it once a week or whatever the schedule is, once every 10 days, however we do that. And also use of the bathrooms and, the responsibilities of the Little League to make sure that it's in swept condition or whatever at the end of each of the games or events. I just think that's a really easy way to manage this, and I think it's something we've been working towards. And Anthony is in charge of buildings and grounds with the borough. That's one of his positions here as a councilman. He can work with you, and we can knock all this out very simply.
I can do myself up if you want.
Perfect, I can use mine as well, and we should communicate.
Yeah, we'll just need real quick.
And I believe, Mr. Higgins, that you had put some sort of a draft agreement together before.
Yes.
It may be more expensive than what's needed, and we're not afraid to cut things out just to make it clear and concise. So if you can provide that to Mr. Perno, then we can work with the Little League, get it done, get it in place, and then make sure that everybody gets out there.
We're gonna get ready to do the field soon, so I'd love to have something in place, in order to have our kids play safely.
Yeah, I mean, either way, what we can do is, and a schedule. So just so that, like a master schedule, we'll make sure that that's part of whatever is in place, that you guys provide some sort of master schedule that you have the ability to do so for that
Right.
facility.
That won't be for a few weeks.
Right. We have a lot of events going on at community center now, and we're renting upstairs and downstairs. So we just want to make sure that if there are parking conflicts, that we figure those out as much as we can in advance. So what we'll do is, in addition to maybe Mr. Perno, Public Works, having whoever you deem to be the contact, or if it's you,
It would be me.
have your cell phone and be able to communicate with you. Elizabeth Browse is managing, Denise's daughter is the one that's managing the community center right now. We'll make sure that you and she are able to dialogue in the event that there's an event there or there's an issue. She also would have access to the bathroom code if needed. So it is a code system. We did that so that we never be able to keep saying that.
Makes sense. Mhm. The only other thing, which is probably more on my wish list, is Roper Field is a beautiful field. It is fabulous to play on. It's one of my favorite places to play. It's also a well-liked field by outside towns that come in. Many coaches from other teams from other towns that have said how much they enjoy playing on Roper. One of the things that we lack at Roper is some type of snack stand. I would love to be able to put something in the form of like what I would call a dry snack stand. Doesn't have water, doesn't really need electric, because most of our games, there's enough daylight, excuse me, to operate something like that. So I would like council to give consideration to allowing us to put a structure on there, not huge, not anything ginormous. Just something for us to be able to store snacks in, put a cooler with some ice in for cold drinks. We play games at, starting at 5 or 5:30. Many kids don't have a chance to eat dinner, so it's on the fly. Sometimes the snack stand sort of takes over as dinner some nights, or at least getting kids through until they can get home.
So, part of the improvement for the veranda that was put in place there has a huge storage area underneath. And it was designed actually with the intent of baseball being able to store the mower underneath of it. Is that an area where you guys, because it's a garage door, right? And a regular door that you would just put up, a foldable table and do what you need to do in there. I mean, there's storage and space in there. It's right next to the bathroom. I mean, is that what you're thinking, or
We were thinking something closer to the fields.
Okay.
Just so, because we're an all-volunteer league. Our snack stands are run by our parents, guardians, grandparents, coaches, spouses. So in order for them to see the game, it would be optimal if it was nearby, because I'm gonna tell you right now, 99% of the people that volunteer during a child's game that they wanna see. They're not coming out to see, my kid playing a minors game when their kid's a T-baller. It just doesn't work like that. But we were thinking something a little bit closer in proximity to the fields. Again, if this is a long range kind of thing that we can kind of continue to discuss and find something feasible and we could utilize the garage this year, that would definitely work.
Mr. Kearns, your guy?
Okay.
Any sort of,
Sit down.
plans or concepts for even long range, or if it was short range, to put something close to the field, it'd be something that we would have to look at and feel comfortable with.
Absolutely.
But
The bigger is getting a maintenance agreement. That's part of that agreement.
Sure.
Figuring out how we would work around all that and all those other things. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. My son plays baseball for the league. You have kids that play baseball for the league.
I do.
Yeah. So, they almost, you have kids that are playing in the league. I mean, so we all know, we've been there, we've been at the games multiple times,
And the snack stands, those are revenue generators.
Yeah. I remember when we didn't have the scoreboard.
Scoreboard.
In the outfield.
We're looking to make sure that works this season. It's
So,
one of my priorities.
Yeah, that was like one of the things that, we added that, added that. So there's all sorts of options we can have a conversation about. I just want to make sure anything that's put in place is done so with the idea that the facility is also being rented, and that we're not tchotchking up the facility and just doing things and throwing them in haphazardly.
No, so that one's,
Yeah, so.
not with all the work and how beautiful the community center looks, and not wanna have something like that.
Yeah, that's all, that's it, that's what we're doing.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Burnham, you,
Yeah, you always get that.
I could just give you
Okay.
my contacts me,
Yeah.
just in case.
Yeah.
609-923-9263.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So was your Jan, maybe those?
McCoy.
MCHOSE.
You literally cross the street. Yeah. That's exactly right.
I know.
Any other members of the public wish to come forward? State your name and address for the record, please.
Karen Minister, 201 St. James Avenue. Just want to ask you guys a couple of questions, please, and you guys, a couple of questions about the last meeting I wasn't able to attend. And, there's all kinds of talk on the street, and I'd rather get it straight from you guys. So my understanding is that a proposed retail dispensary entity has purchased Rite Aid, and that is potential for a retail dispensary there. Is that statement correct?
There is an entity that proposed at the last meeting that has a letter of intent to acquire the Rite Aid property conditioned upon approval of their Class 5 license application to the state of New Jersey for adult use cannabis, yes.
Hasn't been purchased yet, because that's the word on the street, is the building has been purchased.
Building is under a letter of intent, it has not been purchased by this entity.
If I can get it straight from the council. Has the Cannabis Regulatory Commission outlined the regulations yet for marijuana? Because everything I look at, all the research that I do, it's not ready yet. Is that correct?
Correct, they haven't finalized the regulations.
Is there any timeline for that?
No, unfortunately, no. I think they said they were hoping by the spring to have something in place.
So you don't propose that our town will go through approval before the regulations are set?
They wouldn't allow them to open
Right.
until the regulations are in place.
The
And-
timeline, just to,
Yeah, I'd like to understand.
Carrie, that was set forth was that applications are due, are opening
Mhm.
beginning March 15th, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it's on a rolling basis, and there are certain criteria that you have to meet. And depending on the criteria, the ownership, a whole different host of different criteria, you'll be ranked and in different categories. With priority given to, ownership groups that have individuals who were previously convicted of marijuana offenses, veteran-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. There's a host of different criteria. So they'll be ranked. Our understanding is based upon that ranking, you'll be graded. And what we were advised is the pass-fail system. So you either pass upon your application, and at some point, scheduled and timeline undetermined, they would receive approval or a license from the state of New Jersey. Or you fail and you have to go back and you have to resubmit with the appropriate information. The timeline that we were presented was essentially a year before they would ever even be able to open and not begin construction or any fit out of the facility until such time as they would have received approval from the licensing. They don't anticipate that to occur before, I believe they said September, if I recall correctly. September of 2022. Optimistically is when they believe that they would get approval for their license based upon what their read is of the criteria that they check off. So they're not number one, but I think they were like 2B or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But they suggested that it was, if that would be the process, September, then they would have construction. They may begin some fit out if they acquire the property prior to that, or know that they're going to get the license. And then I think they said probably by late winter, early spring of next year is when they would believe they would be opening at earliest.
Are there any other pending applications?
Not that we have provided a letter of support for them.
And is it our intent to just follow the CDC guidelines, or is the council coming up with any other regulations? Or would that decision be made once those regulations are established and reviewed?
The only condition above and beyond what the license permits currently, without knowing exactly what the Cannabis Regulatory Commission of the state of New Jersey is going to put in terms of rules out there, is that the applicant that came before us the other day said that they do not anticipate to have a cafe, which would allow them to smoke in the premises. And we are putting a separate restriction that they would not be able to have a cafe there, even though the license would allow it. So it would just be a retail operation.
Okay, so you're open to other regulations if you're not satisfied with the regulations set forth by the CDC or what we want. Would that be fair to say?
What the body is comfortable with, yes.
Okay.
And that's public. Okay, hearing none. We'll close that portion of the meeting. We'll move into discussion items. Business forum signs. So On the 24th, last week, there was a forum with business owners with regard to sign ordinance. I know this has been the subject of much debate here at Borough Council over the years that I've been involved. And then also amongst business owners for that period of time, we've made certain efforts to improve it, make it more business friendly. It would appear, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of Councilman Fitzgerald, who was there, and I believe Councilman McClune, you were also there.
Correct.
At the roundtable, but there are a number of themes, I guess, that the questions and answer session could be boiled down to. So, Sean, do you want to go through this and sort of talk about what your general take from the meeting was and sort of where we are now, where you left it with them that?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, so it was attended by multiple members of the business community, myself, Councilman McClune, and Becca Callaway. We basically spoke with the businesses and asked them to kind of take us through the entire process of signage, from opening their business to working with HPC to putting up signs as the business progresses, sales go on, things like that, and then wording potentially changing. And as we went through that, we took down notes as in terms of suggestions or questions that they might have had for things that could be changed, streamlined, or just made to overall work better for the business community. And I broke it down at thank you to Denise for passing out the hard copies of it. 5 main things that kind of jumped out. And the first being the initial paperwork and the things that what can be done to reduce or streamline the paperwork required for signage. Basically, similar things you hear from a lot of businesses when they start, that you know, they're dealing with construction, they're dealing with suppliers, and anything that can be shortened, made easier, made simpler for them, make the entire process for them easier. And one of the things we looked at was, I believe, our current paperwork for the HPC approval is 7 pages long, I think, give or take.
About, yeah.
I tried to take a look to see if we could find some ideas, and then to reinvent the wheel, what other towns, other cities are using. Some, their paperwork is as long as 36 pages, some Hoboken's is literally 1 page. So they asked for us to look at that initial paperwork, and we might be able to like I said, look to other townships to see where we might find ideas or methods to see what we can do to reduce that. Fees, and this kind of dovetails into number 3. Currently, every business that opens has to sit before HPC for approval for their signage, and that includes $150 escrow for the legal fee and $100 application fee. Similar to anything else, they're looking to see, you know, what can be done either to adjust those fees, reduce them, or eliminate them altogether. And that, like I said, kind of dovetails with the idea number 3, which was the creation of category signs that if the ordinance is amended to have a checklist of requirements that meet conditions, we kind of use the example of within the zoning operation, if you have a fence that meets all of the conditions, it's not a variance, it's a conforming, so it meets those checklists and off you can go with it. If it's variates out of those conditions, you have to come before zoning something. If we could design something similar to that, where if the signs meets the ordinance's conditions, that they would have to sit before HPC, therefore eliminating the need for the escrow for the application fee, or reduced fee for the applications that was still actually. Number 4 was the ordinance itself. Some of the language, admittedly, it is a little bit tricky sometimes to wrap your head around, especially if you've never had a business before. I know towns like Haddonfield, towns like Huntsville have a similar type of thing concerning window covering, the percentage that can be covered, and there's math equations for it. And the language can sometimes become muddled because you're saying things like the area of the windows, the area of the individual window, or meaning the area of all the windows combined. And if you're not working with one of the sign companies that's kind of used to working within either our borough or one of the other townships that does a similar thing, they tend to get, it lends itself to confusion. Similar to that is some definitions listed, things like coverings versus signage. Is the window being covered, or is it actually a sign? Or even the fact that we, within your other ordinances, we allow for things like products to fill windows. And a perfect example would be next door. And Charlotte's, they fill their windows with chocolates and food and then gift items that they sell through the year. And potentially filling up the entire window area, whereas maybe another business might want to put up a sign that showcases what they do, but we don't have an allowance for that. So they're looking for whether we might want to potentially look at how we're defining those things, product signage, coverage. And then it gets down to just some of the signage itself, the actual physical signage. There seemed to be a consensus that no one was particularly comfortable with the idea of bringing back the whole neon signage. Even the businesses themselves all kind of unanimously let out a loud no when we kind of said, well, what were your thoughts on that? But there were some questions regarding the usage of digital signage, especially some of the newer LED where it almost doesn't even have the look of almost looks like it's so high definition that it almost doesn't look like it's a lit sign. It looks like it's photo streaming or an actual physical sign itself. So there was the question whether there would be any openness to discussing that. So similar to that would be the definition or for backlit signage. The example that we kept going back to was gas stations. You go by a gas station and get plastic signs where it's lit on the inside and it's plastic on either side of the logo, whereas now what you're starting to see in a lot of businesses is where it's a wooden box where, you know, it might be the name of the business or the address is cut into the wood and it's lit internally and kind of just provides a soft glow versus that really abrasive old, you know, bright light that keeps you up all night if you're within eye shot of it. Also, the allowance that we give, we kind of have it built into the ordinance that it's not the percentage of signage on the window. If it includes the name of the business, the address, the phone number, what's considered the important information. Back when the ordinance was written, social media didn't exist, so there was a question of whether we would be going to have an allowance for social media designation that wouldn't be counted against your full window size, similar to if there is a special designation for your business, whether it's women owned, minority owned, things of that nature. Also, flexibility to break uniformity across multiple windows. Some of the businesses have multiple, the whole frontage of their business might be windows. And as we've stated that they have like a banner or a ribbon or writing across it that stay uniform all the way across, where some of the businesses might say, well, we like having a banner on the two outer windows and the middle one, we might want to break and have some language or something else to break it and like describe the business. And speaking to that, the added extra area for informational bars and pinstripes, one examples would probably be McFarland's, how they along the bottom of their windows, they have the different categories of products that they carry within that we don't have an allowance for that. And finally, one of the final ones was the overhanging sign. So currently, if you have one single store frontage, we allow for one overhanging sign that, you know, comes out X amount of feet from the frontage of your building, it has to maintain 7 feet above. If you have a corner business, you can have one on each side, and it was asked whether we would be willing to allow for if there was, you know, potentially one overhang sign that states which your business is, and maybe another one that says, you know, enter sign or a sub sign underneath of it, whether we would allow for an increase in those overhang signs. So some of these I think are some common sense areas. I think others were topics that were discussed during previous rounds in speaking with Councilman Speraza about the last time that they tried to make a go at this. Things that seem to be areas of agreement between business and council. Some of those might have changed over time, but these are the suggestions that were discussed, and where Councilman McLean will be taking these suggestions to HPC for consideration and for feedback from them as well. This is our kind of opening discussions for thoughts, comments, concerns, and general feelings from council in terms of their thoughts.
I'll just add, I thought it was a really productive discussion. I think put together about that. Thank you for being there. Again, I think Sean is done here. It's just all forward, the points that were discussed, I don't think were big recommendations or changes, but capturing everything that is there. As mentioned, we have HPC on Thursday evening. I will review and go through this list in greater detail. Is there any other commissions or groups besides HPC that has authority for signage that we should also get their feedback as we could come back together as council?
I think the ultimate recommendation for, if it was non-conforming with one for joint land, is.
Technically, well, this is, yeah.
Sorry,
I put this on for discussion though, because here's what I would say. Go to HBC, let them know you had the meeting, you can give a general flavor, but the process would be for Borough Council to determine that it wants things to be studied, and it would be studied either by the Joint Land Use Board as a zoning ordinance. It's not HPC. They have no real authority, HPC, to dictate ordinances or provide recommendations or anything of that nature. That is not, HPC is not a recognized group in the land use world.
okay, but they are the group that businesses have to build.
They do, yes, for the standards that are created by zoning. So I'm not saying they won't be involved in the process. This will be the fourth time they've been involved in this process in the last like 6 years. Everybody has already done this a number of times. So I only say that because, I think we have to look at this, we have to take this feedback and we say, okay, well, what is a real issue and what is, business owner A wants this, and because that suits them, and business owner B wants this, because that suits them. Well, we can't legislate based on what every single individual person wants, or we will have an ordinance that doesn't do anything. You might as well just get rid of it. I mean, honestly. And so I'm happy to consider the language, but I just don't get too deep with HPC yet.
Mhm.
I think what the process would be was if council believes that the ordinance needs revisions, we should say, hey, Joint Land Use Board, we want you to study this, we want you to look at this. Here are some of the areas of concern where we think that modifications could occur. We draft some of those, we provide a draft HPC reviews that says this is consistent, this is we like, we don't like. But they're an advisory board, Andrew, in the grand scheme of things. They're not a board that would put the ordinance together. This body would eventually vote on the ordinance. They'll have influence. Mm-hmm. They don't write the ordinance. They don't say this is what it should be. They apply the ordinance to the applications. That's really what they do. So I don't want to get too far out ahead of ourselves. I mean, part of the reason why I asked Sean to boil this down the way that he did is because I wanted to go through it, talk about it, and on a very basic discussion level tonight. And I mean, I have discussion points for at least the top end here.
Okay.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, again, this isn't our first rodeo with the signs. This is, I've been doing this since 2014. Again, I do think it's a different HPC than it was a few years ago, except for one person. And again, with the conversation with these business owners, it was just everything was very reasonable, where I thought that meeting would have gotten into things that were contentious in the past, like the neon sign and what, and that did not, that did not occur this round. And I think a lot of things on here are decent, good suggestions for us consideration if you want to go through them, one by one. And by all means, certainly don't want HPC to recognize they just advise, but they do have some experiences. I do think it's important. And even a group of business owners, I was surprised, thought that HPC should continue to play a role. Maybe it's a little bit less than maybe don't be there all the time, but still that group of borough citizens kind of providing that feedback, I think, is important for our downtown.
So I agree, and I think that HPC certainly serves a role. That's why they exist here, and I like the feedback. They're different than sort of all of us. They're different. Businesses are different. We're different, and I think this sign ordinance hasn't really been revised in earnest since the early nineties.
Yeah, I think we did the A-frames about 2 or 3 years ago, and again, the businesses were very appreciative of that.
I've always said, just adopt common sense, small things, make provisions rather than this omnibus big sign ordinance. It's very difficult to get through around here because there's so many different competing interests. So, I think with regard to number 5, Andrew and Sean and Council, I'll hear you on 5, because I think that that's more very specific about like types of signage and things like that. I don't have any problem, personally, with that being studied, because times change, people change, things change, and I think that we want to clearly keep some of the historic nature of the borough and keep our downtown looking and feeling a certain way, but at the same time, different people look at things differently than those who came before us and put sign limits in place. So just like a couple of years ago, where we removed certain things that were on the taboo list of zoning things around here that seemed like somebody from the 1950s had written the ordinance. We updated it to be more in line with what people see and expect around here nowadays. So I think that same thing can be said for 5 and some of that stuff there. Council, anything on that? I think that's an easy one to knock out and say, hey, we'll consider these things and see what makes sense for our borough.
I think certainly things within the fifth section are things that could go before HPC and let them make determinations whether they think will permit them, and then they make a judgment call when it comes before them. But what I want to say, I think you're right that we're never going to appease all these businesses, and we're never going to get to a point where everybody who sits on HPC, on joint language work, is going to be happy. Everybody has different opinions on different things and optics. But that said, I think one of the biggest things we're hearing from the businesses is just the rigor of the process. I think that one way that we can do this, and Sean mentioned it, I know Councilman Speraza has mentioned it multiple times, is creating a conforming and non-conforming use. So creating conforming use, and I think that pushes businesses to meet what we're looking from that, because they're not going to want to go through HPC because their use is not conforming. But created a list of things. If they meet those criteria, they don't have to go through every application. They can put their sign up because it meets the criteria that we set out. If it doesn't, then they have to go through the process. And there's certainly things in here that I think that we should take a look at and consider with the changing times. But I think that's an easy lift, is creating conforming versus non-conforming.
Yeah, those are essentially by right applications, by right sign application. We've already taken the step of not appointing a solicitor to the HPC in the hopes that we can sort of manage this without having to deal with the escrow fee.
Can we break that down, the escrow fee, or not?
I would say, I don't know, and here's why. I would say I wouldn't change that from the ordinance for the simple reason that if you look at it, we don't know on its face, just because a business owner believes it's a by right application, it's a by right application, right? So at the time of application, they should be submitting the escrow along with the application fee. The application fee, that's the cost for processing internally, that's what that is, right? Whatever our costs are for managing the information, reviewing it, and responding. So whether it's $100, $1,000, whatever that number is what the number is for that. And I'm not saying 100's high or low. I have no idea. I'm just saying. But for the escrow, we have taken the step of saying, hey, can we do this without an attorney? Do we really need an attorney to review this and review every sign application? And Andrew, you go to these meetings. I haven't heard any objection, but it's only been 2 months.
Correct. I think that answer is yes now because of the seniority on the current HPC, that they've done it for so many years with the lawyer being there, that they can basically do the lawyer's job.
Correct.
In disrespect.
And then, so those individuals, so what I would say is don't remove the escrow requirement, but if, let's say, the sign application is submitted and Rebecca reviews it, right? And she says, by right application, she checks that. That 150 goes
Yeah.
directly back. And you're approved, go to, you know,
Yeah, we
signs and
we
get your
talked
sign,
about
you know what I
that.
mean?
And yeah, just, if HPC or just Rebecca, that they don't have to come and present, but to represent or something, that if it is, they're replacing an existing sign, yeah, you know, that's.
Sure.
I think I can see a lot of people getting behind.
There's room there for that, and, you know, so we good with 5 in getting feedback, all right, so I'm just gonna check this off, so for how we're gonna do this, you're gonna work with HPC and see how they feel about that, members of council, feel free to give your input to.
I would say 4 and 5, by the way, because I think the 4 falls in that same category.
4, I think, is a little bit more difficult, way more difficult, in fact. You're gonna get stronger opinions on 4 than you will on 5, I would argue.
Oh, I agree with
When
that.
you're talking about coverage and signage and what's a sign and what's not a sign and.
I would just have the, if you're sending them back to look at 5, send them back and say, hey, can you have a better definition of 4? If not, I'm okay with this.
I don't know that that's the appropriate body to be working on the definition.
Understood. No,
I think a short land use board is the appropriate body to study it for.
Oh, I agree. I thought you were sending all the support to children.
5, I'm just seeking HPCs from a look, feel type of sense. How do you feel about these things? You know, general straw poll. How do these strike you? And you have people who have been there, who have a lot of seniority, who have seen the town over time change. You have some newer residents who can say how they feel about how it makes them, you know, what Merchantville means to them, what the downtown should look like. So I think 5, we can deal with at HPC and add some language into the ordinance if we're going to allow those types of things, you know, at a later date.
Is there a way, or going back to the process real fast, Mayor? One of the things that I've heard from a couple of things, including my wife went through this process. There's not a clear indication that when people apply for the planning board joint land use approval, and then there's nothing in there about signage. Hold that thought.
I'm not, that I'm gonna handle in one. Just give me a minute. 4 on the ordinance language, I want that to go, I think that should be referred to the joint land use board for consideration on some of the modifications there. And if, Sean, if you don't mind, maybe you were at the meeting, showing up to joint land use with some of your more specific notes on those issues, because I know those are ongoing issues. And just let's be clear, it's not just an issue for the businesses, this is an issue for enforcement, it's an issue for poor Rebecca who's over here, it's an issue for code enforcement and how, yes, you're violating, no, you're not, and you know, what the gray area is. I think we have to try and be as clear as possible for all parties involved.
Yes.
So I think the ordinance stuff has to be referred back to the joint land use board.
I do think that was the biggest subject mentioned of what constitutes artwork and what constitutes signage, and the fact that in this 21st century economy, there's less products in retail and more services, and how people want to showcase those services. I'll leave it at that.
That says that, yes.
And I think that's fair, and I think we have to look to not only that knowledge base, but also understanding, you know, what are other communities that we are similar in size and feel and look. What are they doing? How have they done anything? So I think that the joint land use board in their review of this really should be looking at all of those things and should be providing recommendations ultimately back to Borough Council, because we would be the ones adopting that zoning ordinance and ultimately putting that together.
Before you move on, I just want to say on that language piece, I think we need to consider clarifying the language of what's covered. I'm sure they had their reasons when they wrote the ordinance, they wrote the way they did, but the calculations seem overly complex. I think they need to be simplified, because unless you're a mathematician, the calculations are very hard to do. I think recommendation should be.
They're not consistent.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know how they came to those calculations. I do know, as Councilman Fitzgerald said, you visit any small community in our area and you need an advanced degree in math to figure out how many letters you can get on your window sign. It's, I don't know who started that trend. Oh, yeah, I feel.
I
But,
did try, but I fell down a Google rabbit hole in an attempt to try to figure out, and I can, for love or money, I can't find a history of it anywhere.
Well, not that we're going to debate all this tonight, but there is good public policy that sits in the idea that all the windows should be covered, right, with signage. That there should be open windows, that's the look and feel that you're looking for in a downtown. And I'm sure there's planning manuals out there that will say that this is the right percent, or this is what we want it to look like.
Safety.
Yeah, there's a whole host of different issues.
So here's things like shady saloons for the whole, it's really fun.
So there is a good public policy behind it, it's just a matter of what makes the most sense. And quite frankly, some of this stuff, based on some of the newer technologies that you were referencing earlier, may not matter as much if we can adopt newer type of signage that fits, again, the feel, but it's more technologically advanced. Then they're not worried about that. Then they don't have to worry about what's on the sign because they can change it as long as it meets the same criteria. It can say, you know, pretty much whatever it wants and fit everything that it can fit on it. So, you know, 3, I think, is that by right application that we're talking about. I think that's a pretty simple thing to look at. Let's, you know, figure out whether or not, and again, that's joint land use. This is what, if you meet this criteria, you can put your sign up. It will, you submit your sign permit. We look at it, it meets the criteria to check, you're good. Fees, we talked briefly about, I think, you know, we're kind of in this pilot program on whether or not the escrow will be required. I still think you keep the escrow and it gets returned quickly. Now, in terms of the timing, I see timings on there. Let's go to 1, all right, the initial paperwork, streamlining. These are things we've heard for a very long time. We are in the process of implementing this software system that we purchased here that will allow anybody to do this online. And that means that we will build out the portal so that there will be a simple question: do you need a sign? And if you hit yes, then you will then be able to port all of the information just entered for your business that you're applying for and your zoning application into the sign application and enter whatever parameters, maybe if you have a PDF, whatever you need, whatever the parameters are, however we figure that out. And then that would be immediately reviewed by Rebecca or whoever in the zoning department is reviewing that, and it could be returned. We can do that, and we can almost, by creating that software program, not creating it, by implementing it, and by crafting it in a way so that we can basically not make the mistake of failing to provide them a sign application or a sign permit application. We can build that in, and I think we're doing training now. What's the timeline for the implementation of that system?
The fire prevention and public works training, and now we're waiting to do the zoning and code construction.
And once that's done,
Then everything's done.
okay, and so we're talking about being live by probably middle of the year with the program in place. It will take some education. We're gonna have to put together some you know, outward facing stuff so that people are aware of it and create stuff within the website that basically is an FAQ. There's all types of things that we're gonna have to do to roll this out, but that will streamline the process. It will make it easier. It won't be 7 pages. It may be, you know, 15 questions, but it will be through an online portal with still the opportunity for people to come in and get the paper copy if they want. So I think that, you know, and of the 7 pages of the sign application, how much of it are examples?
Oh, I believe, what, 2 or 3?
Just, yeah, it's not that many.
Not that many.
But yeah.
So the 2 or 3, I mean, you're talking about 40% of the application are examples. So I mean, you know, once we go online, we can make it easier. An FAQ page can really give those examples and again, we always have traditionally said, hey, you know, these are the sign companies that people have used and are familiar with merchantable signs. And we're not endorsing anybody, but we're saying these are the people.
There was a discussion about that, about some of the difficulty they have finding, so the Business Professional Association is going to work on, establishing something within their organization to provide new businesses regarding companies that can help them with the sign. And so,
So I think with the software, I think we're in a really good position to streamline this thing, and that was the entire intent. Not just within that department, but within the construction department, public works, fire, front office, code. So, I think we're gonna be good on that side. It's gonna take some time, but it will make it easier, on both sides. So do we want to do a resolution referral for the ordinance language as more specifically set forth by Mr. Fitzgerald to the Joint Land Use Board for their consideration? All right. And then on the HPC side, Andrew, we don't need to do a formal referral, but if you can get some input from them, on, you know, some of the stuff that you saw.
No, I agree with Area 5, again, it's just.
Yeah.
Their points, so again, recognize, you know.
On the application fees, and the escrow fees, Rebecca, I would, ask if you would please just do a quick look to see what the application fees are in our surrounding communities
Okay.
for similar sign permits. I would imagine ours are about, I think we just redid this a couple of years ago. If I recall correctly, we were losing money on every application and we upped it so that we would at least break even. So I think that's about where we are. But if you could just do a brief report, you know, if you can have that back by the 28th of March.
Sure. No problem.
Put this back on the thoughts. Other thoughts from council? Questions, concerns? Okay, well, thank you very much, Rebecca and Sean and Andrew for being there. And thanks to the businesses. Did we have good participation? Okay, participation?
it was okay. It was essentially the folks that are very active with the Commercial Business Professional Association attended. We had a couple that signed it through Zoom to view as well. So yeah, it was the folks over there were the folks that have been here. We had a newer business, so it was good. I would say it was good.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Next discussion item is the community center construction plans facility planning program. So we received the grant funding for the rec funds. We have a couple of quotes for the flooring in the porch area. I want to move forward with the basketball, which Denise can do the spec for, just a simple mill overlay of the basketball area to get that done as we get into the spring and then into the summer, which is when the rec program begins.
We'll use the higher end asphalt, so make sure we use the proper asphalt.
Yes, what we prefer. Whatever covers that grant. I'm kidding.
Not basketball sports, I've actually had a couple of people ask me about the hoop, where it is, and I think that's, I don't think that's like how high it's supposed to be.
Oh, it's been a long time since I was able to dunk. I'm kidding. I don't,
He never done.
I don't know. We'll make sure the public works goes out there. We'll get Norman Dale and the,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
We'll get back to you, I think it's a foot higher than this.
Wait, a foot higher?
Yeah, it's
A
definitely
foot?
higher. Yeah, it's definitely higher.
You're saying it's an 11-foot rim?
I believe, well, I
Well,
know for a fact it's
basketball
my
programs,
son.
we have the
I-
only NBA court around.
No, because how can a young, if
Space
he
Jam.
is a grown man, how can younger people actually make the basketball the point?
11 is too high. We'll make sure that the proper measurement occurs. Nick, I assume the public works to adjust that.
I know they were taken down at one point, and so they were.
That's what I think.
They were
I
like,
They were taken down in the nineties too, a kid actually got his hand caught in the net, back like 96 or 97, and they took them down for like 2 or 3 years, I don't know if you remember when that happened.
10 feet.
That's when I was done.
well, I can't, I'm not gonna argue about the ability of people.
I couldn't do it, so I wasn't doing it.
I know what it should be.
Yeah, I don't think they can do that, it should be 10 feet. Denise, I.
I don't know, we're not gonna do a poll about who knew it.
Yeah, I understand. I'll tell you, I didn't. I'll be better.
We got the Norman Dale reference. Measures, they go in, they measure it, see, gentlemen, you'll notice it's 10 feet here too. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah, I think, well, the extra foot gives us an advantage.
So,
I'll see short guys.
How's the seven?
Yeah, they practice, and then when they get to the high school, we great.
Yes, but I'm aboard.
so the intent would be to have that construction completed before Parks and Playgrounds begins this summer. I know there were some meetings, we've had some discussions about what's going on with Parks and Playgrounds. Are you guys at liberty to discuss anything from your meeting earlier today?
I don't see why not.
Okay.
Yes, there is a plan. So first, personnel, we had a packet deals in front for many years. I think it's not going to run at full-time capacity. We are still looking to go the co-director route this year, with her being one of the co-directors in more of an admin facility. So the other co-director would be more of the day-to-day operations. And so I think our plan is to post for that role pretty soon and it's, see what other applicants we can get for that. From a timing wise, the recommendation is to revert back to the usual schedule, which would begin that first full week after the school year. I think we said June 26th, that's Monday, and it would go to the last Friday in July, so 5 weeks, except for the 4th of July. I had 110 kids last year that had more counselors. Again, the expectation is that there will hopefully not be as many sort of regulations and safety precautions that deal specific to COVID, so maybe less with the counselors. The other thing that we're still looking into is to make a determination on the fees themselves. Again, just the concerns with the inflation, with the materials, the salaries, and costs. I think we did do something last year. That was pretty considerable, right?
Yeah.
So again,
We didn't do anything drastic.
I don't have all that information, but I'd like to get all that information and just make a determination from council. But any other points that I missed from the Parks and Playgrounds?
No, the only other thing is, Danette Strader and the tennis lessons, I know that that's on here for this evening, and that's usually a companion program.
Correct, she usually advertises at first Parks and Playgrounds and an opportunity based on the age and skill set to go over during the Parks and Playgrounds. It will remain a half day from 9 to noon.
Same age group, 4 to 10.
4 to 10.
What's the age?
4 to 10 to 10-year-olds.
They're aging out.
Yeah, it was.
I only have 2 in now, two and 2 out. All right.
But that was one of the things that we talked about, maybe the possibility of other such as activities in the future for kids that are so good.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. I just wanted to, so hopefully we'll have the basketball courts, that whole project completed by that. And, to the extent from the storage capacity and everything else, all that's all handled, right? Community center for the rec program.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually brought that up, just understanding the storage baseball, one of each year's plenty of space, plenty of storage at the time. And there's really no conflict between that program and the baseball field. So,
Right.
I asked that question as well.
Okay, awesome. And it's our intent, I think, as we continue with the improvements, you'll see this evening that we have an application to CDBG Unfortunately, because of the last round of, when they went through the census tract, the only area that qualifies for us is the senior center, because it is for basically low to moderate income or handicap ramps. I mean, it's essentially what we're down to at this point, because none of the tracks qualify, unfortunately. We hope that that will change and in future rounds we'll be able to apply for other areas and other things. But so there's a $300,000 application to CDBG for the improvements to the exterior facility and flooring on the lower level. So that application, that's for council tonight. And I think this is all consistent with sort of the programming of what we're doing and what we're trying to get done at that facility. Long range, we're talking about creating and working with volunteers to create a Friends of Community Center that may run the programming for the borough to make it a more active facility. I know Councilman Perno and I have been for a very long time trying to find ways to do that. Funding from the borough perspective is very difficult to push in that direction. And when we lost the funding from the county to run the senior lunches there, the facility during the day is very quiet. Now we have early voting there. We're one of only, I guess it was 6 locations in Camden County. So we, there are some other programs that are going to be there, and with hopefully the waning COVID virus, and hopefully we won't have any more upticks. The early returns on the rentals to the community center, both upstairs and downstairs, are pretty heavy in terms of the use. So the facility should be very, very active this year.
Does the senior center will that ever come back at the community center?
Not through Camden County.
Okay. Just because the sign that says the Martinsville Community Center says senior center underneath it.
That was required. We got a significant amount of funding from the federal government for the roof, and it had to be a senior center to qualify. So, and at the time it was. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah,
we're not trying to.
We still have senior meetings.
We do still have senior meetings. We do still qualify. We want to put programming go back in place, but the funding. What happened was the county decided, hey, we're not going to all these locations. You have to come to us. So they bus everybody now to more regional locations. That's what they did. All right, that's it for discussion items for this evening. Nothing on old business. New business, we have 2 use of facility forms, one for the PTSD awareness walk, which is on June 25th, 2022, 10 to 1 on the multi-use path. And one is for the, as I mentioned, the tennis lessons at the community center, the Merchantville Tennis Club, the Net Strader's wonderful Merchantville tennis events. I don't know what we're calling it these days, but from March through December of 2022, which does and holds tennis lessons from at various scheduled times and otherwise from 9:30, 12:30, 3:30, 6. You've seen her out there. She's had full tournaments and events day long. She's done a great job. So both of those have been signed off by everybody. I don't know, Andrew, you want to make the motion to approve those? Excuse me?
Can I do both at one time?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the use of the facility, again, for the walk, the PTSD awareness walk on the 25th, and then the use of the facility for tennis lessons at the community center throughout the year.
Second. I got a first and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? All right, perfect. We have one ordinance this evening for first reading. For introduction here, this is ordinance 22-04 water revenue bonds, commercial consultant water commission. Do I have a motion to introduce this? Mr. Perno, second. Second, Mr. Woods. Any discussion on this introduction? Just so everybody's aware, this has to do with improvements in the National Highway Plan to deal with regulated compounds, newly regulated compounds, and future regulated compounds. And it's the second of 5 stations that the water commission will be improving. The first was Woodbine, which should be finished in the next month and a half or so.
And it will start up date April 1st.
Yeah.
Tentative.
So, no discussion on that. Roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Mr. McLean,
Yes.
Ms. Morales,
Yes.
Mr. Perno,
Yes.
Mr. Woods.
Yes.
Thank you. We have a number of resolutions here, which are slated to be read by consent agenda. Does anybody have any resolution you'd like to have considered separate? Seeing nobody asking for any to be read separately, I'll read the resolution to be approved to the consent agenda into the record. Resolution 22-33, approved proposal for first annual Merchantville Monster Crafts and Fine Arts Festival. Resolution 22-34, authorization for support for PSCNG grant fund by PSCNG. Resolution 22-35, appointment of police officer Matthew Hinman. Resolution 22-36, approval for Environmental Resolutions Inc. to complete conceptual design of West Chestnut Avenue. Resolution 22-37, approval to apply for the 2022 Camden County Community Development Block Grant. That was the $300,000 I was talking about for the community center. Resolution 22-38, authorize refund of escrow balance to St. Joe's Carpenter Society. And resolution 22-39, accept grant from New Jersey. This applied 2021 Iowa County Grant Program. Do I have a motion? Second. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Resolution 22-40, referral to land use board for consideration of the existing sign ordinance language as more specifically set forth by Mr. Fitzgerald.
I'll amend my motion to include resolution 4.
Thank you.
Second motion.
First, Mr. Colonel, second, Mr. Woods. Discussion, hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Mr. McLean,
Yes.
Ms. Morales.
Yes.
Mr. Perno,
Yes.
Mr. Woods.
Yes.
We don't have any specific resolutions that we are considering for the next agenda. There are 3 ordinances, which will be for adoption. It's amending chapter 71A, stormwater management controls, chapter 60B, article 4, property maintenance, and chapter 25 fees for the community center. And I don't expect any major changes to what was introduced at the last meeting for any of those ordinances. The third one was by title only, I believe, at the time for the fees, but we have since.
Maybe up the lower level resident $200 plus the $60 setup cleanup, and non-resident $400 plus the $60 setup.
Which is about 2/3 of the cost for the main level, so. And then, we have here pending introduction, the bamboo ordinance, which I know is still a work in progress, so. Council, we can just continue to work and try and put some input in. If we can bring that in to be introduced at the next meeting, great. If we can't, then, we'll try and push it and introduce it at the second meeting launch. All right. Otherwise, I don't have anything else to go to the order. Does anybody else have anything else?
If I could just for a moment, some of you might have known officer in Pennsauken passed away 2 weeks ago. He was at Officer Michael Bell. He was actually my cousin's husband. So on behalf of myself and my family, I just want to say thank you to Commercial Fire and Police for those that attended and for those that offered coverage to Pennsauken PD and Fire during the course of the funeral. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you. I'm sorry for that. Okay. I'll accept the motion to adjourn. So motion is Mr. Fitzgerald, second, Mr. Perno, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?